why don't we get back together and have a few questions? Everyone, why don't we get back together and have a few questions? All right, let's go ahead and get started.
So, how does this turn out?
Okay, we
work?
have our first question.
Okay. I wanted to ask you, Reverend, my name is David Barrows, and I belong to different organizations. However, we do have the problem you're talking about. And I know that going to Black Lives Matter is not enough. I'm wondering if it wouldn't help us to visit Black churches and Black organizations and present ourselves as representing the different peace groups. We used to have Black Voices for Peace in Washington, D.C., which is a great, yes, it was a great organization, but he unfortunately passed away, and after that, so there must be, what do you recommend for people like me, pretty naive in this field, I guess? How should we go to the Black churches and individually, to seek individual churches and ask to speak to the congregations, go to majority Black high schools, speak to the students? What do you recommend for us to ask for volunteers to join our organizations? Because many of us would like to have many more Black members, but I know we're not doing it. We could do a better job. So what is your recommendation, please?
Well, I could have also invoked the name of Damu Smith as well. He was a mentor and a friend of mine, and he was one of the leaders in the environmental justice movement when I, as a younger man, first came into it. When I was just sharing with Robin that I haven't always been a preacher or a pastor. In fact, I came into this way late. I went to seminary when I was 30, but most of my younger life I was an activist and an organizer. And one of the organizing calls that I had was as a labor organizer. And I worked with the National Poultry Campaign of the AFL-CIO as my first campaign that I worked on. And one of the things that we were required to do as organizers, even someone like me who never went to church at all. I mean, and my mother is here, and she's frowning up now because she raised me in the church. But once I got out the house, it was a solid decade before I was going to a church on a Sunday morning. But labor organizers required, as a part of our organizing work, we had to go to church. We had to go to 3 or 4 churches on each Sunday morning. And we even had to find something in the Bible that related to the labor organizing movement that we could use and that we could share. And so I do see value, and I would say that when you go and visit, you may find something else there for you, beyond even what you plan to get. I certainly did eventually, but I also would want to give a cautionary word as well. One, we should be very clear that it's not about going and getting Black folks to join your organization. It's about going and being amongst Black people and discovering what it is that you have in common. Discovering where your shared interests are. Discovering how you, in fact, might be a resource and a support, but how you can learn just as much from us as we can learn from you. Many of the people on these fence line communities knew more about the chemistry of environmental contamination than all the epidemiologists and the chemists and everyone else who were coming in, because they had lived it, because they had experienced it, because they knew it. And so I think that is the kind of principled dialogue, principled communication. Yes, you can go to a church, but a whole lot of Black people don't go to church on Sunday morning. And I would say in any city, there are more black people and brown people who are not in church than those who are. So, go to the laundromat. Go to all the places where people live, work, and play, and don't just go to the church. Go to the mosque too. You can go to the mosque on Friday and then go to the church on Sunday. And so. Because so oftentimes in the name of peace, we're oftentimes advocating on behalf of people who come from Muslim countries, and we have no idea of what it is that the Muslim community is actually experiencing. We're learning about Islam from Wurth Blitzer, who you shouldn't learn anything from.
No.
And you are robbing yourself of the opportunity to come into fulfillment of what it is that I believe that God has called you to as an activist, as an organizer, fighting for peace, working for environmental justice.
Thank you.
Hi. Hi, my name is Li Yang. Thanks to this panel for very comprehensive talking. I just want to know if you can explain the issues, the real issues. How are we going to solve our social problem? That's how the basic problem. Unless we understand it, then we won't be able to unite for really good purpose. Because I think according to the history, there got to be some opponents or enemy. They always use unjust scheme or scam or any trick. And so the same as from domestic, from your local area to global, there got to be some group who penetrate to the good group and then spread the bad word against the good people. So that means against each individual organization and their members. So that means destroy our society and their families. So I think in this local area, on the basic issues, we have housing problem, we have mass incarceration, we have police killings. Unless we understand that, we identify the problem and who is the one use their unjust influence, deprive or victimize those people, and then send the real victim, the society's the enemy to jail. I think we are always will be in the losing side. So I just want to know exactly how are we going to identify whether there's a financial institution or whether there's a government officials or their staff or even contractors, whether they are doing the right things or wrong things. So and it's really easy to identify because they are usually doing the wrong things. And when they are doing the wrong thing, that's against our rights or against our constitution and against the law. They cannot do this trick and then divide us. So I just wonder if we can really identify the problem, which a lot of people have already identified. We got to unite and stand together and say those people cannot stay in our society for luxury and be a millionaire or just helping those millionaires doing something wrong. They are doing something wrong. They take advantage of indigenous people's land and all people's life or people's property or their home.
Right.
So if we can do this, that would be wonderful. We need this effort.
All right, thank you. Yeah, all the issues are definitely related. I was in prison myself for nonviolently protesting at the School of the Americas, and they were having prisoners make weapons for the military there. So all the issues are connected. I totally agree. And there is so much trickery going on. Does anyone else want to respond to that?
Just briefly, I think that underlying all of these symptoms, these are all symptoms of an underlying unjust economic system, which is capitalism. And so, the elephant in the room, I don't know. I think that we have to, I just recently learned the expression accumulation by dispossession. We need to challenge accumulation by dispossession, which is the enclosure of lands and privatization of resources, or the commodification of nature and humanity, driven by a militarized, colonial, state in partnership with the private sector. So, or in other words, we need to take action to protect the earth and its inhabitants by dismantling the structures of capital and creating community systems that are based on equality and respect. So I think I don't have a lot of faith in government. My way of seeing change doesn't even always relate to responding or reacting to government, but is about community development is a way. Creating structures that are socially inclusive, working to listen to communities, to lean into, I'm not saying I'm great at this, but knowing that we need to lean into that area of discomfort and dismantle the structures of fear and build our communities. And we are going to build those, the community that is manifesting the equality and manifesting the peace. And those people will become irrelevant ultimately. So it is a dismantling of the economic system by the community from the grassroots level. Does that answer the question?
Totally agree. We need structural change. Yes.
Okay, just to dovetail on what's being said here, it is a systematic problem, and we could call it corporatocracy, the corporate capture of elections, court, and regulatory agencies. So I just wanted, there's a kind of like a social engineering of a force for corporate interests that systematically prey on the weak points in our laws and our Constitution. So I wanted to recommend the latest book by Senator Sheldon Whitehouse called Captured: How Corporations Have Captured Our Democracy. And the reason I say that is he says what, where, when, what groups did it, what was the laws they changed, how they did it. And so it's kind of like a map of like how to unravel this corporate agenda.
Does anyone else want to respond?
I think it's, you know, we in the Black Alliance for Peace, we embrace a people-centered human rights framework. And we recognize that it is very important for people to do the work and to discover our solutions and our answers and develop our strategies, and that our freedoms are won not simply by an appeal to some government or some higher force, but that we are the ones that we've been waiting for, and that we have the ability to create our own new realities. And we have to do the work of identifying who is the enemy. And if we want to use that word enemy, I don't mind using it, but enemies are represented in institutions, are represented in organizations, and then there are people who are individuals. We also don't ever want to make it seem as if our fight or our enemy or our opponent or that which we resist is so big and so complicated that we don't have the ability to impact it. Many people in my generation when I was growing up used to talk about these secret societies and the Illuminati and all of these different groups that were the hidden hand behind everything. And I was like, do they have an address? Let's go visit them. And sometimes what we have to do is we have to take our power analysis that all community organizers are trained in developing at the beginning of any campaign. And we have to recognize that the things that we fight are institutional or organizational or individual. And as a minister, I also believe that we also fight not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and high places. And there are systems, and there are ideas, and there are spirits that are part of what it is that we have to do battle with. And that tells us some about how we have to be prepared. And if all we're focused on is what we're against, and I need to say this clearly because this is one of the greatest lessons of my youth. As an organizer and an activist, I knew what I was against. I was anti-capitalist, I was anti-sexist, I was anti-racist, I was anti-imperialist, I was anti-polluter. What am I for? What am I trying to build? What am I trying to create? Once I get rid of all of those names and all of those institutions, organizations, and individuals, what do I have left, and what is it that we have to build? And that has to be at our start as well. We have to have a vision of what we're trying to create, which goes beyond just eliminating what it is that we're against.
And if I could just add an example a small example, but that, we're at this kind of pivotal time, and I know there's, this is just one of the corporations that's captured our democracy, but that there's groups working together on pledges to candidates to not take any fossil fuel money. And that's just one small example, but we're also working on candidate pledges for people that support the 100% renewable energy off fossil fuels, just transition component to all of that. And I think we are at a time right now where we clearly need a different composition of the elected officials who are making these decisions about how our taxpayer dollars are being expended and what policies are being put in place on so many different issues, right? But we have an opportunity, I think, right now at the grassroots level to organize and have that change dramatically over the next few years. So that's just one example.
And another small example is World Beyond War, along with Code Pink and some other organizations, are working on a divestment campaign from the arms and defense industries, which controls much of our economy. So please get involved with that. Next question, please.
Yeah, one thing for Robin and one thing for Reverend Mjumbe. Robin, could you speak to, is there any overlap that you see happening right now between the militarization happening, expansion over the Great Barrier Reef, and all of the concern that's been going on for years about the Great Barrier Reef being destroyed because of the warming of the water, because of global warming? Is there any groups coming together around that?
Most of the major environment organizations in Australia, or at least on the east coast of Australia, are campaigning in some way to save the Great Barrier Reef. It's sort of a buzzword campaign, Save the Reef. I feel that there's no point in actually calling to save the reef without calling to demilitarize the reef, which almost no organizations do. So I see a clear separation between our environment movements and our peace movements. I think that peace movements, environment movements are fearful of going to where they think is political or unstrategic for their client base, their supporter base as financially, their financial supporter base, or fearful of seeing political. And also the environment movement is heavily under attack in Australia as well as around the world. Environmental activists get killed in some parts of the world. Environmental activists in Australia get vilified, and organizations constantly scrutinized and get their tax status, their financial matters scrutinized and under constant surveillance. So there's a lot of reasons why maybe environmental organizations don't go some of the hard issues. But one of the major issues also facing the reef and related to the rising temperature is agricultural runoff and huge coal mining industry in Queensland. So that the person who made that quote, who's an activist in the area, he's one campaigner for a conservation group, the only paid person in his region. He has 50 coal mines also on his one patch that he's challenging. So there is a lot of things impacting the reef right now. So, but the militarization of the reef is one area where Friends of the Earth, we are grassroots intersecting social justice and environmental justice. We work on it. Most organizations aren't doing that.
Okay, I'm afraid we'll have to cut off the questions. We're over the time already, but we'll be around afterwards if you want to continue the discussion. So thank you all. Thank you to our presenters.